Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom.
Good evening, everybody. How's everyone doing on this Ash Wednesday as we begin the season of Lent 2018? And most of us know that Lent is the preparation time before Easter when we celebrate the risen Christ. And that's a great time of celebration and joy, and hopefully, prayerfully, we'll have nice, warm weather, as I believe Easter Sunday is on April 1st this year, so hopefully it'll be nice. Some Easters it's earlier and it's a little cool, and you don't feel much like celebrating on some of the days. But we should always celebrate that, no matter what the weather, right? Anyway, to get on with the show, this time, for some, is a time that people dread in a way. They're asked to make a Lenten sacrifice, maybe do something a little more spiritually in addition, volunteer some time, whatever it be. And for others, they possibly don't want to meditate and contemplate all this suffering and the passion that Jesus underwent for us. So in that case, it's for some it's trepidation a little bit. But there's another way to kind of look at Lent, because it's a journey like most of our lives, and it's a preparation, as I mentioned a minute ago, for Easter and the great resurrected Christ and what that means for us. So it can also be a time not only of sorrowful reflection, because we need to reflect on the gruesome torture and death that Jesus obediently went as a sacrifice for our sake, not for his own. Most of us were put in this world, obviously, to be born so that we could live. Yet Jesus, he is the only one that was put into this world to die. And that was the reason for him to become one of us as a little baby child and grow to adulthood and make that sacrifice out of love for us. So in that way, this is also a time of joy, because we're very, very blessed to have a God that loves us enough to undergo all that, even if there, as we are told, was just one of us. And that is a great reason for joy. And yet, when we look at Lent a little more closely and try to peer into the sacrifice and then the resurrection, and yes, we've heard, if we've got some age on us, we've heard this many, many times. We've hopefully gone through the Triduum many, many times. And we've done what we were supposed to do, fulfill our Lenten duties. Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. Never too late to start them again, even if we fail, even toward the end of Lent. And it becomes sometimes a matter of rote, like a prayer we say over and over and over again, but not really paying attention to the words. And it becomes automatic. So Lent for others is just that. It's an automatic ritual without really any reflection or contemplation, and knowing that we'll get more into it as Easter approaches, possibly, or we'll just wait for the big day itself. So we don't do anything like the Stations of the Cross, or maybe a little extra holy hour or so, or go pray a rosary to rest home, any of these things. And it doesn't have to be as extravagant as that. It could be just as something as simple as lighting a candle in your own room and having some quiet time and just listening, which is very hard to do for most of us. Me too, very much hard, is just to listen and not have my mind going 180 miles an hour with my thoughts and my prayers and what I want to tell God. and just let him whisper in my heart. So that's a tough thing, easy to do, to set up that candle and close one's eyes. Maybe you have a couple pictures you like of, say, Jesus, and like, say, Sacred Heart's very popular, or a crucifix, of course, and just meditate and just let him do the talking. And maybe it'll just be that profound silence, and that's fine. But to make some kind of commitment, that's great. But as I mentioned a minute ago, a lot of this, especially over a period of time, we lose the meaning of what's really happened here. Now, at the Mass, we know, I believe they call it anamnesis, where you are put back in time in a place in history. And that's what happens with the Mass. We don't repeat the sacrifice at Calvary that Jesus gave us, but it's re-represented each time the Mass is held. It means we are present at that Last Supper, and we are present at Calvary. And that's an awesome thing. So what we want to try to do is to try and make this Lent more meaningful. That's what we try to do each and every year. And sometimes I guess we hit it, other times we don't. Key is to keep trying. But for those who are new, or have just become, or going to become Catholic at the Easter Mass, what we want to realize is that we look at our world today, and we look at our lives today, and we see a tremendous amount of turmoil. Things are so fast today, much, much faster, much, much more complex than they were 30 years ago, 20 years ago, and even 10 years ago. We see things now and hear of things that we didn't even think of years ago. They were far removed from our mental capacities. Now, you're bombarded with what we didn't even think about in a lot of cases. Vulgarity and cursing on television, all kinds of sexual innuendo, if not explicit. And that's just television. And even radio. And the movies, you know what I'm talking about there. Any R-rated movie, or you have to have a lot of blood and guts, I guess a lot of bad language, and who knows what else when they were creating these pictures that was in their mind. But much more importantly like that, and by the way, that also includes literature. If we go back and look at some of the literature that when we were growing up was written, you did not see nowhere near the language or some of the things written in these books, which would just, like say our grandparents, they would be stunned. And we see a world that right now, again, as it was in 1962, just because it's out of news doesn't mean that it's not still an issue, is on the brink again of coming to a place where we're actually thinking about nuclear weapons again. We see all the gang violence, the bullying at schools, the teen suicides, the STDs, the scandals, whether they be athletes, politicians, movie people. We're told how to live, that the culture sets the example in what we are to achieve. You must have fame, you must have wealth, you must have power, or a combination of all three, or you are nothing. And we see that the more and more we try, man to be God and make a paradise here on earth, the further and further we actually are heading to that, and yet we're about to crash and burn, and we don't see it. We actually think we're almost there. Now they're getting close to, or they have cloned monkeys. It's not going to be the last stop. And there are places, this is my opinion, where we shouldn't go as human beings, that are totally in the realm of God, that we should leave alone. But in a society now that is post-Christian and as a nuns, as they say, and I don't mean N-U-N-S, but N-O-N-E-S, this is the fastest growing group of young people. And what that is that they believe in nothing, no religion, nothing. The nuns. They have no denomination, no faith. It's just inconsequential to them. We see, too, this dependence on technology. And again, technology is a tool, just like any tool, good or evil, depending on what we, human beings, do with it. And we worry now, I just saw an article about robots now being built that are so efficient at doing jobs we used to do that they can replace human beings as work. Clearly, this is a place we do not want to go to replace the human persona with a machine to make others very, very wealthy and to put other people out of work where they can't earn a living and provide for their family. This is a very dangerous place for us to go. Man needs work. It gives him dignity. It gives him something to do. And it gives him a sense of worth when he's able to provide, especially if you're a male. If you're stripped of that, very difficult. It's very difficult psychologically to handle that. That's why in one survey long ago, they had a question of what were the most traumatic experiences you could undergo as a human being. First one, death. Second one, loss of job. As if your very identity was taken from you. So we don't want to go there. We don't want to go there. But we're going to examine our own lives. Because there's something that we are very familiar with that I sometimes think, including myself, we want to kind of skim over or kind of get away from. And that's the topic of our own deaths. And in our Western culture today, it is not acceptable to talk about this. We tend to have the funeral, it's the Catholic masses, we have the funerals, and then we got to move on, which is a normal course of our lives. I mean, you have to go on. And we pray for those that seem that they can't. It's a very tough thing for some people, very tough thing. And, you know, we need time to mourn. And this is something that has kind of been stripped away from us. Now, when I talk about getting back to normal and going back to work and experience the joys and happiness that we have in our lives, we also need a time to mourn where we don't get right back into it. And maybe you do have an important job, and I understand that. And possibly with a death, you're back at work the next day. I'm not criticizing anyone for that. But when we as human beings, the way we are created, do not allow ourselves time to mourn, there is something that happens to us. Now, we may not acknowledge that. And it may build up in us without us acknowledging it over a period of years. But then at some point, there'll be the crash and burn, where we're going to realize, oh my gosh, what is going on around here? And do you know the Romans, because they wanted people subservient to them, obviously, to the state. Remember, the state was everything. And it's kind of funny, because we almost, and we do that today, the state then, and as the state now, is treated almost as if it is a human being with a life. And it's not. The state, or the Roman Senate, whatever it is made up of human beings. It is not a living entity for us to serve this so-called entity. And we, in many cases, have lost sight of that. But getting back to the Romans, they did not want people to mourn. And they had an amount of days that one was allowed to mourn their loved one. And then, boom, there were severe consequences if you didn't get back on the ball and start contributing to society. And in many cases, the society is the elitists who are living high on the hog at the expense of others. Don't forget, in the Roman days, slave trade was incumbent upon their economic system. Without the slaves, They were finished. And they couldn't afford any downtime, free or slave. So you were allowed a short period of mourning, but then you had to come back and do your duty. And in many cases today, it hasn't changed. Short period of time. I'm not going to give you this personal example, and I won't to the individual, but when his parent passed away, he thought he'd get a few days at least just to kind of recollect and see what was happening and just time to mourn and go from there and to see where he was, get his head on straight. They called him his company, I believe, the second day or so. So where are you? You better get back to work or else. Might have been the third day. Can you imagine that? Incredible. Incredible. There, in that case, no time to mourn. And, of course, what happens later? And I'm not blaming that company. There's a lot of things that make up our guilt, but that's what's set in. Guilt. Guilt. Guilt that he has told me will last to the end of his life. Can you imagine that? And, of course, we try to help the people and steer them down another path. And we look, again, at everything we do as man. Everything. You've seen this in your own life. I've seen this in my life. It passes. You look at your children now, who have their own children, your grandkids, and how fast did the time go when you were having the Christmas with them as children and watching the joy and expression of happiness when they opened their gifts as little children and playing with them and setting up those directions for those toys and games which no one could figure out, and you had to do it on your own, and they were great, joyous moments. And now that's gone. And I will bet you for most of us listening to the show tonight, it seemed literally like yesterday. I remember in my own case the unbelievable Christmases we had here with so many people, so much laughter, joy, Christmas music, caroling, and it was just, my gosh, it was being transported to another world, a good, joyous world, a heavenly world. And that seems, I can remember it like yesterday, even as I'm speaking right now, images of those Christmases are in my mind. And they are so many years ago. And again, no matter what we try to do, the Roman Empire, the Egyptians, our empire, Britain, Spain, France, they were empires at one time. Look where they are now. Are we headed down that road? Some think so, some don't. History, time will tell. But that's not the point I'm trying to make. The point is, no matter what, even as the United States of America or any great nation or any of those great nations that preceded us, time will change, circumstance will change, and what we knew and what we had will pass. That is one constant that we can count on in life, is that change will occur. Now, not all of it is bad, and not all of it is not welcome, but in a good majority, it's not what we wanted, and it's not welcomed at all. And some of these are cataclysmic. Our lives are turned topsy-turvy no matter how much we try to plan, save, struggle. That we just don't know for sure. Am I saying not to be prudent and plan for retirement, plan for the kids' education? Of course not. That's foolishness if you don't do smart and prudent things, especially with your finances. You know, we talked about St. Paul. And so get back to work. One of the things he was jumping that the Thessalonians for was because they were so convinced that the second coming was coming anytime soon. They chose not to work. They chose not to do this. And Paul had to jump their case. He said, you can't use this as an excuse. So get back to work and earn your food. So you want to be prudent. You want to be faithful, but you want to be prudent. But again, we see these things happening in our lives. Look at us when most of us were younger. And men or women, maybe you were playing sports just a few years ago, and it seemed it would go on forever, that it would never end. Our youth would never end. And 50, 60, 70 years, 80 years later, we sure are not playing baseball or basketball or tennis or anything. Not the way we used to, at least. And we make rather when we used to maybe run 10, 15 miles every couple days, maybe we walk a few now. And that's a natural progression. It's a natural adjustment. As I was saying, the natural progression of this is the change. And it's just mind-numbing to me how fast it happens. How fast it happens. And, you know, one thing that's kind of a reality check for me is because of the DVDs and some of the networks, they carry the old television shows that I grew up with. And I don't mean this in any bad way, but you look and you see these people that were so good looking. And I don't mean this in any, like I say, bad way, but now you see them in their 80s and 90s, it's like, oh my gosh. And you know what? That's what's happening when we look in the mirror in a lot of cases. And when we look at the pictures we had years ago of our grandfathers and grandmas and even us, like say we were in their military uniforms or things like that, or your grandma was in her wedding dress, it's like, wow, they were young at one time. And that's what's being said about us. I knew that was happening to me when a lot of people started holding the door open for me and going, have a good day, sir. I said, when did this sir part start kicking in here? But that's what happens, because all these things have to pass. And all we do, which I think for us, especially as a society, is hard for us to contemplate, is that it all goes away. It all goes away. You know, sometimes it's so appealing to think that, you know, if I only had that cabin in the mountains, oh, if I had that beachfront property on that island, life would be paradise. And we know, I think, deep down, and I'm not saying not to try and get those things if you can, but that's not going to be a complete source of happiness. It's just not. If you're at the bottom of a mountain, and that mountain decides to slide down with its trees during a torrential rain or mudslide, or if it had a lot of snow and an avalanche, your dream cabin can become a tomb. And all it would take on that beautiful island is for a Category 4 or 5 hurricane to come trouncing through. And now it's not a paradise any longer. So even in our wildest inklings, as we try to control this and to control our happiness, because this is what's at stake. We, as human beings, want to be happy. We want to be joyful. We want to laugh, and we want to smile. And now, not counting the people with physical handicaps or mental handicaps and challenges, because that's different. These folks have a real challenge ahead of them. A very difficult one, and yet at many times they are more happier than the people that supposedly have everything. Because we take things for granted. In many cases, they do not. Many cases. And they hold on to what they have. And they're joyful and happy for what they have and what possibly they may not lose, prayerfully. And it gives them great cause for happiness and joy, because we all want that. And I'm not talking, again, with people in severe psychiatric problems in their lives where they may be pathological, things like that, evil type of thoughts running through their mind. And through no fault of a lot of people, there's chemical imbalances. I'm not any psychologist, psychiatrist, so I don't want to really go there. But I'm talking about the average person that is transitory, that has decent mental characteristics. Basically, it's most of us that go through life, getting a job, having families, and doing those things, playing sports, enjoying the picnics, enjoying life. And even us that have all this, and it is a lot, I mean, so much we take for granted, as I mentioned, the sight. To see the sky at night and the colors of a rainbow or the smells of food, and to be able to witness this and touch and feel is something that's extraordinary if we really, really think about it. It's extraordinary, the gifts that we have from God. And yet, and me too, we take them for granted as if they're going to be there every day. And for us, we still, with all the gifts we have, maybe we have a beautiful roof over our head. And here in this country, we decide when and what we're going to eat, not if. And we have an automobile, most of us, maybe two. And we'll fine, go on vacation and go out to dinner and enjoy all these good things. And they're great gifts, and they should be enjoyed. Problem comes when they become an end in themselves, that we think this will bring us complete happiness and joy. It will not. Eventually what happens is the kids want to have families of their own. Again, natural progression. What gets tough for the parents, especially if they have grandkids, is when that family decides to go across the country and move out of state. Now we have a very big change, a very difficult change, much, much different than families of the past, where the grandparents were around for the most part to see their kids grow up and be around them and celebrate all the Christmases, the Easters, the birthdays, all together, the picnics. That becomes much, much harder when they're across the country. If you're in New York and they're in California, you're not celebrating all the Christmases, all the Easters, all the birthdays. There are no more picnics. It's rare, and it's infrequent, and it's great when it happens. But still, there's a disconnect, and it takes a little while to get warmed up when we do visit, because there's a strangeness now. There's a little gap there, even our closest, and that's just got to be overcome. And thank the Lord, is overcome quickly. But it's still tough because, once again, even if you get that visit, there's going to be the separation, and they're leaving. You know, St. Therese of Lisieux talked about that life here was nothing but separation and tears. Very true. No matter how blessed we are, no matter what successes as mankind looks at we attain here, it all has to go away. We cannot hold on to it. And I think deep down, there's a reason we aren't completely, utterly happy and joyous when we obtain the things and goals, which are good things to do. It gives us purpose in this life that we achieve. But deep down, we know it's not going to last. It isn't. We may build a great legacy and carry on and set up our loved ones, and that's a good thing. But if we predecease them, we're not going to be around to see them enjoy that. So even then, we know that this is going to come to an end. And I think this is one of the reasons we've gone off kilter as a society, because when we don't look at this Lent and what it means and the joy that it can bring because of Resurrection Sunday or Easter Sunday, is a reason that many, many people, including us, get down and out, get depressed, that life really isn't worth living anymore. I'm just going through the motions, man. I get up, I go to work, eat, watch a little TV, maybe a little sports, go out to a movie once in a while, bring out the family to dinner, and do it all over again, day in and day out, day in and day out. And then what ifs can start creeping in there. What if I did that different? What if I didn't get married? What if we didn't have kids? What if I quit this stupid job? And you start to play and mind game yourself. And that's kind of tricky because you can start to realize and become a pity party for yourself. And that could lead to animosity of who you are and what you expect. And we're going to turn that animosity in ourselves to the outside. Because, man, misery loves company. And if I'm going to be miserable, so are you. So are you. So don't let me see you smiling or being happy. No, because I'm not. Because my life is a disaster. When in real perspective, it isn't. But we do that to ourselves because there's always more to obtain, always more money, always a bigger car, always a better house. You look at technology, how much it's spread up the speed of inventing things. And there's always a better cell phone. There's always a better printer. There's always a better, faster TV, computer, car, airplane, this, that. And at times in our lives, it seems everything is spinning out of control, not just the world, but us too. And there's a reason for that, because in many cases it is. You know, there's a story by the famous author G.K. Chesterton, and while he may be a little difficult to read, he is, I would strongly recommend, if you like to read, picking up a couple of his things. His books are unbelievable. His essays, unbelievable. He wrote in the 1900s, and what he wrote is so prophetic for today. It's incredible. And he writes of a character called Innocent Smith, who's, I'm not going to tell you the whole thing, just one example, so in case you do get it, you'll love the read. But he's on trial, and it comes out on the trial that in one episode, I will tell you this, there's a professor, and he's a brilliant, brilliant scholar. And he makes the case to Chesterton's character, Innocent Smith, that the best thing mankind can do for himself is to kill himself. And he goes through a list of why life is so lousy, human beings are so lousy, that everything is just blah, blah, blah. And Innocent Smith pulls a revolver and points it at this scholastic. Well, he jumps out the window, and he's hanging on. And Smith is pointing the revolver at him. And he knows, this is it. This guy's going to kill me. And as he's realizing this and holding on, he's in fear for his life. The very life, in the way Chesterton does it, it's very condescending how he talks about killing these people and how kind it is to kill people. He sees the colors of the sky and how green the tree is and how brown, gray the bark is and how the birds are really singing. All the things he never noticed. And then he realizes, I want to live. I want to live. What a gift this is. And of course, that was Smith's whole point with the revolver. And of course, he doesn't shoot him. And when the scholastic comes back inside the window, he's got a whole different perspective. And that's many of us who gets beaten down so much by life, beaten down to our knees, where at times it doesn't seem we can get up, that we miss that. And the point of Chesterton's novel is to look at the beauty that God has given us in the most simple things that we take for granted, and we will have joy. Easy to do? No. But if we really worked on that, we'd see what a wonderful life this really is. And that's where we come to Lent, because that's what Christ has done for us. You see, this is St. Paul's theology. Humanity without Christ is going nowhere. Adam grasped to be God. And in doing so, and that's the sin of disobedience, and taking all of mankind with it, we lost what we had. That walk with God, that perfection with God, that will of God's our will, the same. Not that we're God, we're not. But we want to do what He wants to do out of love. And it was perfect. But when we wanted to be God, as Adam grasped at God, we have now a leaning toward concupiscence, that leaning towards sin, that sometimes perplexing, why did I do that? I know better. And yet, we still went through. Or when we actually start to plot, and this where it gets bad with mortal sin, we actually start to get curious. And then we begin the formation with full consent of the will, ending in a sin that we know could cause our death, our eternal death, and yet we do it. And we know we shouldn't. We know we shouldn't, and we do it. And that's that leaning. But here, Christ, who was God, empties himself out. So he didn't, in this case, grasping, meaning holding on to. He didn't hold on to who he was. He let go. Why? To be obedient to the Father, for love of us, to make that sacrifice so that we could have eternal life, to rectify what went wrong on the tree in the garden, to make it right on the wood of Calvary, to rectify it and make it right. One piece of wood bringing death and sin, and the other piece of wood bringing life, joy, and happiness. As St. Paul tells us, O death, where is thy victory? O death, where is thy sting? Because it's been defeated. And this is why Lent is so very important for us. And we need to reflect on what actually happened here so many years ago. Because Christ now, all those things I talked about that can get us down and drag us to the pit, he can take that away. He's that antidote. Because of Calvary, we now have something in the end that will never be taken away again. That heaven and eternal life with Christ and all those we cherish and all things we cherish, they're going to be united, never to be separated again. And we will know that joy. That's going to be the beauty of it in heaven. That's the beauty of Easter Sunday. We are going to live again. And not just live as we lived here, with all the enjoyments and tastes of heaven we get here on our earthly lives, but an incomprehensible joy and love. And we will know that this incomprehensible joy and love will never, ever, 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 ever end again. That is how we are going to find our complete joy and our true purpose in life. Because Calvary, yes, it won this for us, but we are still pilgrims here on earth. There are sufferings, yes, and sadness, yes, and death, yes, here, despite Calvary. But because of Calvary, all that is turned upside down. We have real, true, spiritual life that will last forever in a glorified body, which we can't imagine. So for those that don't consider themselves good looking or don't consider them cut up to snuff in what their lives were or can be, you will. Because Christ knows, he looks into your soul, and he knows who each and every one of us truly are. Because most of us, brothers and sisters, including myself, live in a world where we put on many, many, many different masks each and every day of our lives. To some, we are that knowledgeable professor and teacher. To others, we're the great athlete. We may be the great athlete and a husband. We may be the great athlete and a mother. We may be one thing to our peers, one thing to our friends, one thing to our relatives, one thing to our children, one thing to our coworkers, one thing to the people in the grocery store we never met, or the guy we go into and do banking business with. We all have these masks we put on in order to be accepted, especially if we don't feel we truly are accepted in who we truly are, because we fear it. We fear that people are going to see us for who we are, truly are. And it may not be the mask or who we think we are. And that is very tough. And that's one thing about Jesus. People knew who he was. He was authentic. And we can get that authenticity. We can be like him by following him, by receiving him in the Eucharist. We become authentic Christians. And when you follow the Lord, because of what transpired on Calvary so many years ago, you have a sense of purpose in your life and hope. And you do have a joy. And you do have a peace. Now, what we're talking about here is joy and peace. When say your loved one dies, it's okay to grieve. It would be a little bit suspect if you're attending your wife's funeral and you had a big smile on your face. Yep, well, she's in heaven right now, and all, you've heard the words. We've all heard them. And that's not really what we see. I've been to funerals where the mother was on that child, on the coffin, and the tears and the sorrow were so emotional, screaming, and I mean that. My boy, my boy. So to tell someone there like that, well, everything's okay, it's absurdity and cruel. Time, that'll work out. But we can't deny, and we shouldn't, that ability to grieve and mourn. The Virgin Mary and St. John, Jesus' followers that stayed, they mourned. They mourned. His mother knew what was going to happen. She knew her son. I believe, this is my opinion, that she knew, and maybe had again, this opinion, not a church teaching, that maybe Jesus, maybe he appeared to his mom before Mary Magdalene, her disciple. Who knows? Who knows? It's outside the box. But he had a special relationship with his mother. And my whole point to this is not that. It's not to get into a theological discussion about that. But to point out that the Virgin Mary, if she knew that her son would rise, still grieved. Still grieved. So it's okay. That's the point. It's okay to grieve. And Jesus knew that would happen. He himself wept. But what's different now, since Resurrection Sunday, because of Lent and Good Friday, and that's why we call it good, because on that terrible day, when man killed God on that Sabbath so he could worship God, how's that one? That changed everything. That's why it became Good Friday. And then we know that Jesus went to the underworld, and he took the just souls home with him. The good thief, that day, that Friday, you will be with me on paradise. An assurance of that. And it all started going from there. That is what happens with Lent. That's why we should have joy, because this is what our God has done for us out of love. He doesn't want us being morbid. He doesn't want us being in the pit. He sure as heck doesn't want us to be with the devil and his minions. Most definitely. And gives every opportunity to avoid that tragedy. Every opportunity. There's a thing called mystical fortitude, which we should pray for every day, that at the end of your life, your particular judgment, Christ is going to let you see him for who he was and give you one more shot. And I'm not saying this to just get you out of you can live your a life of debauchery, and then at the last second, here you go. First of all, that's up to God, not us. But if you got that last shot, pray, because you'll see him for who he is in the light, and look at yourself, that you don't have the obstinacy and the pride to say, well, thanks, Lord, I really appreciate the second chance, but you know what? I'll head downward. Because as crazy as it is, souls do it. They choose for themselves where they're going to go. That's where God gets a bad knock from a lot of people, especially atheists. How could a good, kind God send somebody to such a place that we would, in our wildest imaginations, would not ever want to go due to the horrors of it? And it's because we choose, because of that free will, which got us into trouble in the first place, if you want to think like that, but was also got us to have the great gift of love through our free will, and certainly the free will of God to love us. There's three types of love. There's the eros love, the lustful love. There's the filial love. That's like our relationships, our families, friends, things like that. And then there's the agape love. And you know what that is? That's to love the unlovable. And that's what God did for us. Because when we see murders being committed or these atrocities, man's inhumanity to man, like the death camps, it's hard to picture, and I've said it myself, how could anyone love these people? And I'm making that point because that's sin. And guess what? We're sinners. We're sinners. And yet God loves us. He loves those people that did the death camp. He loves the unlovable. What a world this would be if we could love like that. It's the highest form of life. Highest form of love. That's one thing St. Paul makes a lot of sense to me years ago when I was young and trying to figure out all his faith in Jesus, is that he said, maybe some would willingly choose to die for a good person, a good man. But this one chose to die for people that aren't good. Boy, that hammered me home between the eyes. What a difference. Never thought about that. Well, I did start thinking about it then. And it's true. And that's the highest form of love. Because I think most of us can admit human beings' love in a great many cases is conditional. I believe it's one of the reasons people like pets and dogs and cats, because there is unconditional love there. These animals love you. I mean, I've seen, where people have abused these animals, and yet they walk up and the animal's wagging their tail all excited to see them. It's mind-boggling. How many of us could put up with that? So our love becomes conditional. God's love isn't conditional. And the saints, those that are saints, they can get that unconditional love. It's very hard to do. Very hard to do. But this is what we need to reflect on at this time of the year, is the joy in what is Jesus' purchased for us. Because it's very important, that Resurrection Sunday. It is everything. We talked about this last week. For without it, this is a waste of time. And I believe that for a lot of people, that's what they feel. This is a waste of time. That's what that professor was saying in that Chesterton novel. No matter what we do, it goes away. No matter how much I try, things don't go the way I plan. I go one step forward, 2 steps back. I save and scrimp for this thing I'm going to buy. And then, just when I think I have enough saved up, something major comes up that I have to put the money to, and I don't get what I want. And it seems to be a pattern of many of our lives. And when you stay in that pattern and you don't open up your heart to Jesus, that you can go into a very dark place. Life is hard enough and a battle, and make no mistake about it, it's a battle. As we practicing Christians know, with Jesus, there are always obstacles to overcome. And just when we think we're going to maybe be on easy street for a while, well, we're coming down that mountaintop pretty hard, and we're going to be in that valley, and it's foggy in that valley. And that's when, in that foggy valley, we have to reach out our hand and grasp the Lord, who said he will take us through the shadow of death, and fear no evil, for I am by your side with my rod and staff, and he will protect us. And that is a big difference, what faith can make in one's life, and what this Lent can make in one's life, leading to Resurrection Sunday. And with all my heart, I want to ask you, if you're in that dark valley, if you're searching for something in your life and you have not found it, and you're beginning to think, well, maybe it's in drugs, maybe it's in the music, the alcohol, the sex, whatever, maybe the occult, turn to Jesus and see him on that cross. Because his love for you, and I mean this to every individual listening tonight, to each and every one of individual, to you as that person, to that man and woman, that Jesus did that for you. And he loves you. And even if those out there have a trouble, you've had an abusive father, you didn't have any father, he walked out. You never saw him again. This isn't the father that the human father was. This is one that truly, 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 and believe this, begin to believe this with your heart and soul, even when your times get tough in life, that he does care for you, and he does care what happens to you. And even if there is not that happiness that we seek here in life, I can tell you, and promise you that in the next life, you will find that happiness if you follow him. And that is the whole core of what we believe and what Lent leads to on Resurrection, Easter Sunday. Because even if we don't have that joy and happiness that all human beings have and want, not have, I'm sorry, but want, because some don't have it. And even those of us that have it, it may not last for long periods of time before the next battle, the next struggle. But we believe that we will have this, and you will in the next life. And there is a next life, brothers and sisters. That's what Calvary was all about. Jesus didn't come to make nice and please the people and set up a power kingdom of political entities. He came to do battle with the devil himself, to break the hold that the devil has on the people of this world and the hatred the devil has for us and creation, not just human beings, but all of creation. Jesus came to destroy and defeat him. And at the end of time, when all is said and done, and all has passed, and it will, we will be with him if we follow him. And that's why it's important we try to find him, to listen to those whisperings in our heart to lead us to him. Because this is how we will get true peace. A peace that the world and we may not understand ourselves, but we'll have it when things are in a riotous situation. We'll have that presence of mind because the Holy Spirit will be with us. And you know, two of the great saints, St. John Paul the Great and St. Mother Teresa, they had it. When they walked in the room, the people could see it. They had that holiness. They had the Spirit. They had Jesus in their hearts. And you know what? A lot of them wanted it. So as we close the show tonight, my prayer for you, for those that don't believe, that are searching for something in their lives, please take time this Lent. Go to a church. Take the Scripture. Get a book on Jesus. Something. Some relative that you know is spiritual. And talk about Jesus. And maybe, just maybe, be open in your heart to let Jesus come into yours. And I guarantee you that you will be on the adventure of your life. You could not imagine what will happen. And at the end of your life, when things are all said and done, he will welcome you and say, "Come, my good and faithful servant. I have prepared a place for you." And that will never, ever, ever, ever end. God bless. Happy Lent.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.